All right, everyone. Well, today we are back and we're joined by Dennis Davis, a coach over Xtreme Couture. So firstly, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I'm doing great.
Yeah, that's good.
What about you guys?
Yeah, not too bad. Just surviving the COVID state of Australia. You know, it's like a little island prison, but it is what it is. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's what I've heard. Yeah.
yeah. So, look, we wanted to get you on because we think it's really important to talk to coaches in MMA as much as the fighters, because that dynamic and the coaches obviously spend so much time working with the fighters and building it up that it's a really interesting perspective to get. But obviously, before you were a coach, you were a fighter yourself in the game for a long time. So, what I want to ask you is, do you feel that you took to fighting or coaching more naturally? What was more natural for you?
Fighting was more natural for me. Yeah, because I'm more of like I guess I would say more of a quiet guy. Growing up I was more quiet guy, but then had a lot of like anger and stuff, and I just loved fighting. So to me, that kind of just went hand in hand. Like I didn't really have to think about fighting and being in front of people, because when I started was fighting, it wasn't that huge at that time. And then even when it got bigger, you're zoned in. And so that wasn't really a case for coaching. It's like, oh, you got to get in front of a bunch of people, you got to get mic'd up, you got to, stuff like that. So I think that took I think fighting obviously was much easier. When coaching, it's took time to develop some skills and get better at things.
Yeah. Well, what qualities do you think are quite important for an MMA coach to say consistently work on? Do you think, because we know sometimes as a fighter, you can be an amazing fighter, but it doesn't always necessarily transition to being an amazing coach. So what would you say there's some aspects of coaching that you feel like you have to consistently work on?
I think that's different for every guy, but I think obviously, I think for me, trying to stay ahead of the curve, because the sport's always evolving, and like, what can I do as a coach where, you like I take it as like a fighter, you'll see some fighters, they'll get to a certain spot and then they kind of stop growing, right? And I don't want to do that as a coach. So I don't want to think like, oh, I know it all and like I'm good. And then all of a sudden the sport passes you by, right? Because you see it is constantly growing. There's new things, guys trying new stuff, better athletes, right? That are able to do some things that guys, when I was fighting, guys just couldn't do some of the things that guys are doing now. So for me as a coach, it's like, how do I stay ahead of all the other teams and coaches? And that way we could be working on new things that guys ain't seeing and try to use that to our advantage.
So you just talked about it there, how evolving as a coach is almost as important as evolving as a fighter, so that the game doesn't pass you by. So what are some of the things you do to try and evolve as a coach? Is it working with other coaches from other gyms? Is it looking into different coaching methods? What are some ways that you constantly try to evolve?
Yeah, for me, I watch film, like tons of film on certain fighters, and just watch, and sometimes we'll watch it a few times and like see what they're doing to break it down. And then I'm a guy that, I put the ego to the side and I go out and I work with other coaches too. I've been the head coach of Xtreme for a long time, and I've always went, and if I see a coach that's doing something well, I put that ego to the side, like I'm a white belt and don't know nothing, and I'll travel and work with some coaches. I went out, same thing when Dwayne Ludwig, when he was doing the switch stance, and I came from a style was like, oh, never switch your stance. This is how it should be. And then I'm seeing Dwayne and his guys at Alpha Male, when he was at Alpha Male, they're switching and doing things that was working at the highest level. So I was like, man, what are they doing? So I got a hold of Dwayne, was like, hey, I would love to come out and work with you. And so he's like, yeah, of course. I went up there and act like I didn't know anything and just picked his brain as much as possible. And then understanding when he was explaining why he's switching and doing certain things, I mean, it's made my game grow to a completely different level. And then like another coach I go and work with sometimes is Rafael Lovato. who again is world-class jiu-jitsu guy, and he's also competed in MMA. So a lot of this stuff transfers over, and I'm just constantly trying to evolve. And we, luckily at Xtreme Couture, we also have so many high-level guys that come in from all over camps, and I'm constantly watching them and seeing what they're doing and asking them questions, almost like if I was a fighter, and constantly trying to grow. That way I can, give it out to my guys and stuff like that.
So you just kind of talked about it there, that you've worked with Dwayne Ludwig and you've worked with all sorts of coaches and all sorts of fighters from all over. So, one thing that we hear a lot from casual fans who don't really watch or understand the sport is that the UFC is where the best of the best are. And for someone like me, I personally don't think that's true. I think there are amazing fighters in most of the top tier organizations. So where do your thoughts kind of lie on that? Is it for you the best of the best are in the UFC, or there are amazing fighters in, organizations here and there?
I think the UFC has probably the most talent overall. If you're looking at like their roster, how much talent they got, I think UFC has that. But if you're talking about overall the best guy, I wouldn't say that's always the case. Like I'm working with this guy now, Maz Burnell. He fights main event in Bellator coming up. And I'm telling you what, this kid is incredible. And I would put him against anyone in the world. And I think in organizations like Bellator, they're top, 5 guys. They can compete, I think, just as well with all the UFC guys. Now, I think once it, starts trickling down, for like Bellator, once you get out of the, the top 10, 5 top or 15, whatnot, yeah. I think top 10, yeah. Then I think the overall roster isn't as strong as the UFC. But I think that they're cream of the crop guys. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen a lot of the Bellator guys come over and have success, or you've seen some of the UFC guys go to PFL and haven't had as much success, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of guys out there. I think the UFC does fantastic at marketing their guys, and marketing their organization. I think they always have. So I think when people think of the best guys, it's UFC. But there's some guys out there that are killers, and they maybe just don't have the name yet or the recognition.
In terms of fighters overall, I think Xtreme Couture is really one of the standout gyms, I think, in the world. What do you think sets apart Xtreme Couture as compared to other professional MMA gyms? Is it something to do with the coaching staff, the approach, the facilities? Because obviously Eric Nixick being there has a big help to the other guys. Especially Francis. I think I speak for everyone when I saw that 5th round footage of him talking to him. That was amazing. That was quite inspiring. So, what do you think it is about Xtreme Couture that really sets apart from other gyms?
Yeah, I think we, and it's hard to say because I'm not in all the other top gyms all the time. I just know from my experiences of working with our guys, we help each other. All the coaches, like obviously all the fighters have certain guy as their like head guy, but we communicate a lot. Me and Eric, Eric's actually was my students that I brought up. And I'm the first guy Eric ever cornered. He was one of my students. And when I was fighting, I was like, you're going to jump in, you're going to corner me. And then at that time, he knew nothing really. And then you just see, over the years and him asking questions from me, asking questions from Cepho, and then other good guys that's come in. And really, you've seen Eric over the last few years really blossom into the amazing coach he is. And I think a lot of that is we all have the same mindset of how do we get better, right? And a lot of times it's tough. You see some coaches and stuff, they almost act like they know it all, or they can't be vulnerable in front of people of like they don't know everything. So I think we keep each other in check and we help each other out as much as we can, even if it's a fighter I'm not cornering. I've game planned and helped other coaches of like, hey, these are things I see and go make it happen. And I think all the coaches do that for each other. And I think that stands us apart where, we don't let one coach's shine get in the way of us helping them and working. And I think sometimes there might be some guys, they all want the limelight, and sometimes you'll see a coach maybe step over a different coach trying to get that spot. And that's where you see teams kind of like fall apart, you know, in the past.
So you kind of talked about it there, how at Xtreme Couture, different athletes will, you know, have their certain guy that they'll work with or a different coach that they'll work with. And obviously having that relationship between coach and martial artist and coach and athlete is just so important. And having that sort of right relationship that clicks for the athlete is just so crucial. Have you ever worked with a fighter or an athlete where you can just kind of feel that relationship isn't clicking? And then how do you as a trainer go about approaching that? Is it something you talk to them about, or do you just try and kind of push through and build that relationship through the training?
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously feel it with some guys, you know. For me, if usually I'll usually find that out sooner than later. Like I might coach a guy a little bit or help him out when he comes in the gym, and I'll kind of know right away, like, do I want to work with this guy? And if not, then hey, this coach I think is a good fit for you, and push guys that way. I haven't really got with a guy where it's been like, you know, we've been working quite a while together, and it's like, this just ain't working out. But if that was the case, I'd be like, hey, what do we got to do? Right? Go work with this guy or go work with that guy. I think we have so many high level guys in the gym with coaches and fighters that we have plenty of work to go around. And like for me, I'm super busy a lot of times, and it's like, well, if this coach could help you better than me, and you guys clicked, then work with that guy. And then a lot of it's just guys' attitude with what they need, right? I think there's some fighters that need that guy in your face and pep talk you, like Eric. You know, Eric does a phenomenal job of almost like that football captain who gets on guys and like motivates them and gets them fired up.
Yeah.
And some guys need that. And so right away, if the guy comes in the gym and I see, oh, he's that kind of guy that needs that attention, then, oh, go work with Eric. That's your guy, you know? And then I'm more kind of quiet and like, hey, just get to work, but I'm not going to cheerlead a guy too much. So I think it's just personalities. What's a guy need from a coach? And I think we have so many good coaches that we can kind of direct them in the right direction when they first come into the gym. Yeah. So I think we do it pretty well.
From a coach's standpoint, if you know someone fresh comes into the gym or wants to be a fighter, you know, wants to be a pro MMA fighter, how do you sort of approach that and determine whether or not you think it's not necessarily possible from the start, because everyone can kind of, you know, you have people that bloom late and those sort of things, but is it something where you sort of Shark Tank someone, or is it something in training that you see? Like, how do you sort of go about someone who's starting in the MMA gyms?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm pretty blunt and honest. Where it's like, I've told the guy, like, what's your goals? Because he came to me and asked me to be his head coach, and I just asked him what his goals were, right? And when he told me his goals, I'm like, it's hard to like shit on a guy, but I told him, I'm like, it's not going to happen, right? The guy was 35 years old. He was 0-3 as a pro, and his goal was to go to the UFC, you know? And I'm like, you're 0-3, you're 35 years old. I go, just age alone, that even if you were 3, you know, flipped it, you're still probably too old for them to give you a look. I go, now, if you told me, hey, forget about UFC and maybe we can get in the PFL, right? First, we got to start winning some fights, and then maybe we can get in the PFL, who's actually signing a little bit older guys. And you've seen some of the older guys have success and win the million. And I was like, now that's a goal you should probably look at, because what you're telling me, it's probably not going to happen, right? So first off, I'm just trying to be as honest as possible. Right now, if the kid was 23, hey, we got time. We can do some things and change that record around. And, you know, maybe by the time you're 30 or whatnot, maybe we can get in the UFC. But we also have a very good system at the gym where we have regular classes. So if there's someone brand new, usually, hey, get into regular classes. And then we do an amateur team tryout where every like 6 months or so we do tryout, and we'll have like 30, 40 guys tryout for the amateur team. And then we pick like, okay, hey, you're good enough. If not, hey, go work on those things. And then they get on the amateur team, and then they're part of the amateur practice. And then eventually once we feel they're ready, get an amateur fight, and eventually they turn pro. We brought a ton of guys. I mean, myself, I brought a ton of guys from scratch all the way up to the UFC that way.
Just to kind of touch on that, is that one of the more satisfying parts of being a coach, when you can work with an athlete from, sort of the start, where, they've walked into a gym and they're either, just getting involved in martial arts, and then, maybe they take some amateur fights, win a few amateur fights, and then take a pro fight? Is one of the more satisfying parts of being a coach, being able to witness that development?
For me, it is like pretty much most of my career, I've built the guys up from scratch, because I run the amateur team as well, and I've built guys up from scratch. I've actually had amateurs that have had one amateur. They were 2-4 as an amateur. Came to me within 3 years. I got them into the UFC from a 2-4 amateur record.
Wow. Yeah.
And like taking them and we make that walk. I mean, there's nothing like it, of like, man, this person had a losing amateur record, and now 3 years later they're making a walk. And I've had other guys I've worked for 10 years, and finally we got the call, and it's like, oh man, we finally, like, after 10 years of grind, we make that walk. And for me, there's nothing like it. I mean, that's been my favorite thing as coaching is seeing that growth from guys, and helping out with the goals and finally achieving them. That's fantastic. I know, like, if you're looking at it as if you're trying to be a coach financially, it's probably not the best thing, because again, I've worked with tons of dudes where I've worked with them for a number of years, and it's like, they just didn't make it, and I've spent hours on guys and hours, and then, I've spent hours, and finally they did make it. And then it's like, whoa, I'm finally making good money, and I don't want to pay you what we originally talked on. I know you've been working with me for 10 years, but now how about half of that money? And it's like, and so that can be frustrating compared to where, hey, we get some stud who's already, he's 6-0, he comes in the gym and he's a few fights away from the UFC. And it's like, as a coach, boom, that could be a quick way where, hey, I'm actually making money and a living, where the other way, you lose. Like, there's many years I just, even coaching some UFC guys, I'm still breaking even, coaching, a lot of the other guys. But then again, at the end of the day, the satisfaction, and eventually when I get one of those guys I built from scratch and we actually do go fight for a title, I mean, for me, that's more than money.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of, you've been in the sport for 20 odd years now, and the evolution of the sport's, come a long way. In terms of, from a coach's perspective, what do you think as a whole of the MMA glove? It's a big topic and a big one for conversation. Is there anything you'd change in terms of the MMA glove? Obviously, eye pokes was pretty prevalent on the weekend with Adesanya. Is there anything you'd change in that, or are you pretty happy with it, how it's going?
Yeah, the glove, I don't know really how you would change it too much. Yeah, I mean, you could make it, more like a boxing glove, but then you can really grapple very easy. So I think they're just kind of stuck in that spot where it's like, like Bellator, they kind of got it where they get their glove went a little more round, so it doesn't let guys, extend their fingers as easy. I mean, that's still pretty new, so it's probably going to take a little while of seeing, like, hey, after a while, a couple of years, and it's like, well, how many eye pokes? And there's very few eye pokes, then maybe that's the route to go, where they can still grapple. And if they use it a few years and it's like, it didn't really change much, then that's probably not the route, and you're probably just kind of stuck with that. I think the only other option you could probably do is penalize guys more, of like, hey, watch your fingers, but if you accidentally poke a guy, that's an automatic point, right? And now you're going to get those guys who's actually sticking their hand out, really thinking about doing that without a closed fist or palm up, because they're not going to want to obviously lose a point. That 1 point in a fight could change everything. So I think they'd probably think about keeping those hands closed a little bit more. I mean, that's really, I think, the only options you would have, depending on the Bellator glove, if that actually starts working or not.
Yep, for sure. Well, Dennis Davis, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed getting a coach's perspective, and especially for a coach who started off as a fighter and has been in the game as long as you have. It's a real honor to speak to you and to kind of pick your brain a bit about martial arts. So we really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
You're welcome, man. Thank you.